at the plain of Moab, and you can see this is really where we were at last week. They were at Kadesh Barnea, and you can see they had to take a rather circuitous route because rather than crossing through Edom, because the Edomites denied them passage, they had to go up and around and down up around Edom. That's one of the things that caused their complaints, the hardship of that journey, and consequently some of the punishment that came about because of that. But they're now north of Edom, north of Moab, camping on the plains of Moab, and that's where they're going to spend the remainder of their time in this section as they prepare to enter into the land of Canaan. So tonight we've got a really interesting study. It's one of the more fascinating, and I say that, it's one of the stranger stories in the Bible. I don't know if y'all feel that way. I've always felt like the Balaam Balak section has been kind of a strange section of Scripture. But underlying all of the events that we're looking at tonight is an important promise that God made to Abraham. Do y'all remember what that was? Yeah. Okay. So essentially, that's what we're going to see happening. And God promised Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. He said, "I will bless those that bless you. I'll curse those that curse you." And that's really what it be about. It's spiritual warfare, in a sense, if you will, where Balak, king of Moab, it's this spiritual mercenary named Balaam to come and to curse the children of Israel. And so that is an important promise that's really underlying this text. So, Joe, you want to just kick us off with the first section here? I've kind of broke chapter 22, where I feel like the majority of our study is going to be on chapter 22. You get to 23 and 24, you get to the oracles of Balaam, the attempts to curse Israel when he ends up actually blessing them. So I feel like a lot of our study is going to be in chapter 22. But Joe, go ahead and kick us off with some thoughts here in this text, if you would.
Well, as you said, we find ourselves on the plains of Moab. In trying to think through this, you read through the wandering in the wilderness period, and there's 40 years that happens in a relatively short period of time. So I was looking at some time stamps. Aaron dies on Mount Hor on the 40th year in the 5th month of their wandering, right? And then it seems like as you're reading chronologically, they're standing at the plains of Moab almost instantly. We don't know exactly when this happens, but it's the 41st year, the 1st month, and the 10th day that they actually cross the Jordan and enter the land, right? Which we're not quite there yet either. So we're in some months period of time where they continue to wander, they continue to complain. As you said, it is interesting that it seems like the fiery serpents got their attention, and some victories in battle have increased their trust in the Lord. Mm-hmm. It did make me wonder this afternoon. I was reading back over it. It made me wonder if the fiery serpents helped to thin that wicked generation. Like maybe they were the ones that were prone to complaining, and it was a way to kind of expedite as they're getting closer to crossing over into the promised land.
Well, and if nothing else, those that were wicked among and unbelieving among the newer generation
would have also been called out.
Yeah, you would think probably there were some innocents caught up, but you would think that God probably directed that primarily at those who were guilty of instigating that particular sin. And so you've got the congregation being purified further through that punishment and those deaths.
Well, and it's interesting, I don't know about y'all, but I think it's the third oracle where it talks about there being no deceit in Israel. And when I first read that, I was like, dude. Who are we talking about? But you think about, there's been a purging, there's been a cleansing, there's been a purifying so that they can enter that land and get the promise.
And getting to that point a little bit later on, God's not going to punish an innocent people. And I think that's kind of what Balaam is describing at this point is, hey, these guys haven't done anything worthy of discipline or cursing, so you're not going to get me to do that. If they had done something that was worthy of that, then you might have some leverage, but looking out at them, they not sinned as to invoke the anger of God.
They were doing that. They were trusting God, and they were seeing the benefits of it. So jumping into the narrative, as you mentioned, so Balak, I like your phrase, the spiritual mercenary. He hears of Israel coming. Verse 3, it says, Moab was exceedingly afraid. Some versions say that sick with dread. And I read something that said that is the idea of being so full of anxiety that you want to vomit. You ever been that worried about something? That's how worried Balak was. Should he have been?
I'll say yes and no. Primarily no.
He shouldn't have been. And one of the interesting things to me about this is if he had asked questions, instead of operating under his own conclusions, he would have realized that Moab was in no harm. Because in Deuteronomy 2, chapter 9, Moses was instructed to leave the Moabites alone, right? Because who were the Moabites descendants of? Lot. And they were given that land as an inheritance for Lot. They were safe if they had just asked questions, if they had just inquired of the Lord instead of plotting to ensure that that Israel would be cursed. And so instead of operating out of a place of trusting God and chasing after God, they operated from a place of fear, and he led his people to destruction.
There were several nations that Israel was prevented from attacking. Essentially, anyone that came from Abraham, they were prevented from attacking. So that would be, say, in the instance of the Edomites, they were forbidden from attacking them. That's why they just said, hey, we want to peacefully pass through your land. And the Edomites forbid them passage. But God had said, you're not to take any of Edom's land. I've given them that land. He said, you're not to take any of Moab. I've given them that land. You're not to take any of the Ammonites' land. I've given them that land. All of them were either connected directly through Abraham, derivatively, or through Lot, is who Moab and Ammon comes from. And so because of his connection to Lot and his faith, I think God has promised them that land. So had they sent someone in waving a white flag, then they could have found out, hey, Israel's not a threat to us. But you can also understand why Balak would be so afraid as king of Moab. He's up here kind of looking down out among the people, and he's going to take Balaam to see the same sights. And this huge army, and what have they just done? Well, they've destroyed Og of Bashan and Sihon of the Amorites and taken their land. So you think it's just logical. I'm next. They're taking my door. And so that really gets him to seeking out a solution for this Israelite problem that he's got.
Well, and I actually thought about that this morning during your sermon as well, because it's another example. Who did he go to? I mean, he goes to Balaam, but who does he go to even before Balaam?
The elders of Midian.
The elders of Midian, and let's not lose sight of the fact that Midian was a descendant of Abraham's family.
We're going to come to this narrative a little later on.
Right, but then also Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite. And had good relations. So there were some connections there, but you see Balak trusting in the power of men. Let's form an alliance. And then you see him trying to manipulate God, for lack of a better explanation.
It's operating out of the flesh. To your point about Balak's baseless fear. How oftentimes are the things that we are afraid of that terrorize us turn out to be just completely and utterly insignificant. But that's what fear does. Fear robs us of. Doesn't rob us of what's going to happen tomorrow, but it does rob us of the strength of today.
I wrote down in my notes, how often do we ask God to carry out our plan based on our perception of things rather than asking for his guidance, his wisdom? And then I'm guilty of that, and probably most of more.
It's a good reminder not to do time of distress.
Always time to pray.
Let's talk a little bit about Balaam.
Balaam's an interesting guy, right?
He's something.
He's something. Balaam, I don't know how we're going to get past Balaam. So we ask him, let me ask you this way, what do y'all think? What do you make of Balaam? He is a walking contradiction, for sure.
When you consider that he is a spiritualist, a medium, a diviner,
that's kind of how I see him.
That's exactly opposite of what Leviticus 20 and verse 27 talks about. He calls in verse 18 of number 22, he calls him my God, and yet he's going to be a diviner. And so there's a lot of incongruence.
Well, I read something this afternoon that was interesting to me because it suggested that as Balaam goes through his oracles, and clearly he's a sorcerer, right? It reminds me of Simon the sorcerer in the New Testament, but clearly he's a sorcerer. But the thing I read this afternoon suggested that he saw the light, like he had and I'm not sure that's so.
You read the rest of the story, you find out Balaam's going to see the light, but it ain't right now.
Right, but even that, God uses a wicked person to accomplish his will, right?
Nowadays, a lot of times we think of these type of people, tarot cards, and people who voodoo and witches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we kind of view them more as scandalous, or at least that's the way my view of a lot of those people. But there's something to it here in the Old Testament, and I'm not sure what I would read into that. But he had a reputation. He was not near to them. It took a while for him to travel.
About 400 miles was what I read. Yeah.
And so you're talking a 3-week or 4-week journey to get to it, to see this, and to to petition him on their behalf. And so this, we're talking about the time frame a little bit. This is a slow process from where they were coming from and where they were going to with this back and forth. And so this is, I think you were right, this is one of the weirdest stories to me, just because of who he is, and then how this goes down with him essentially fulfilling God's plan.
Yeah, and the discussion Joel and I were kind of having beforehand is God, undoubtedly God speaks through him. So by strictest definition, Balaam is a prophet in that he speaks a word that God gives him. And he has all the right answers, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we progress through the text. But he really fits into your sermon last week about false prophets. He fits into that characterization as the greed. In fact, I think he's set up in 2 Peter chapter 2 as kind of the epitome of a false prophet, operating not from false words, but from a false motive and from corrupt motives and his greedy desires. So while he does speak for the Lord, he kind of, he's immoral, he's corrupt, he's greedy, and we're going to kind of see that playing out in the text. Lance?
I'm really confused by him. So in verse 18, he says, I cannot do anything in the small, great, constant command of the Lord my God. And I believe that's using God's name. It is Yahweh. It is?
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess God has been speaking for him before, and he sees the God of Israel as his God.
Well, he makes that claim, doesn't he, somewhere in verse 8?
Verse 18.
Verse 18?
The command of Yahweh my God.
Okay, so there you go, right? So he claims Yahweh, right?
Yes.
I wonder, though, in fact, I texted Zach this afternoon and asked him if he thought the 7 altars and the 7 bulls. I wonder if Balaam sees Yahweh one among many, and maybe the mightiest, but I think the stuff I've said, he was from Baal Peor and Baal Peor.
I thought it was Pethor.
It is Pethor, but it's
Baal-
also Baal Peor.
I thought those were two separate places. I
I
thought Baal Peor was where Balak was going to take him to look over the people.
think it is. I actually
Okay.
read something today that was talking about the 350, 400 miles a day.
Maybe a lot
Found some
closer.
archaeological
Yeah, I
evidence
saw that
indicated
too.
it was closer,
I've seen both sides.
So, yeah.
But
Um,
well, I've got a thought on what Lance is bringing out because he does. And I think there's something worth noticing. One of the things that we're going to see, and lead up to this point, and we're going to see historically with Israel, is this concept of syncretism. What syncretism is the integration of multi-religions into one. And so you go to Joshua chapter 24, verse 14, and the whole choose you this day. But prior to that, he says, your fathers served the gods beyond the river, and they served the gods in Egypt. But at the same time as worshiping these false gods, they also worship the one true God. So the syncretism is the incorporation of false religion into the true religion. So you've got the worship of God and faith in Yahweh, but you also believe in all of these other gods. Then you go to 2 Kings chapter 18, or 1 Kings 18, where Elijah's on Mount Carmel with the Israelites, and he said, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. And so again, I think you see syncretism where you've got the worship of Yahweh, but also the worship of these other deities as well. And that's where I can see Balaam fitting in, is because he claims loyalty to some degree to Yahweh, Yahweh my God in verse 18. But at the same time, it's very clear that he's involved in paganistic deity in seeking answers from other gods and other powers. So anyway, that's kind of how I reconcile that as he is a worshiper of Yahweh, but at the same time, not Yahweh exclusively. May? It's really not. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really not.
well, isn't that basically what Israel to a lesser degree, Judah to a greater degree, Judah rarely stopped completely worshiping Yahweh. They just threw in Ashtoreth and Baal and other gods.
Solomon did the very same thing.
See, in the New Testament, the unknown God. It was just trying to please everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it from a humanistic perspective, the more the merrier, right? If this God can't do it, maybe this other one can. Yeah, that's idolatry.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that's where Balaam fits into all of this. Is in some sense he is a worshiper of God, but not exclusively. And so the exclusivity of Yahweh to Israel, I will be your God, you will be my people. That was what was unique about the relationship.
Probably just overlooking it when we read it, but where does it say that he was a follower of other gods and other than?
Well, I mean, it doesn't directly state that to my knowledge, but you see some other things taking place that indicates that he was. He engaged in pagan practices. For one, okay, he's outside of the covenant. He seems to be outside of the covenant people of Israel. So that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a worshiper of Yahweh. The influence of Yahweh, I suppose, could have spread that far. But he does. One, they take him fees of divination. So he's used to operating for fees of divination in verse 7. So the Moabites, when they send their emissaries to him, they bring him money for his services. And his spiritual services are going to be to curse the people of Israel. So they're taking him services. He wants it. He's ready to do it. Doesn't seem like this is a new thing for him. So he's already seemed to have got this procedure out. And as a worshiper of Yahweh, there would obviously be no involvement with that. He would be if he was going to be a true servant of God, then he would be worshiping God alone. You get to chapter 24. Are you going there?
Yeah, verse 1 says, "Now when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to seek to use sorcery, but he set his face toward the wilderness."
So just a couple of things to put together to seem to indicate he wasn't a worshiper of Yahweh, at least exclusively, but also relied on. And when we get more to that section, and we probably need to go ahead and advance to that.
I think we might be giving him a little too much credit. Maybe in word.
I really think that's all it is. His heart is obviously not loyal to God or to God's people, or he wouldn't be trying to.
Well, there's no hedging about what this is. Leviticus 20, verse 27. Now, a man or woman who is a medium or spirit shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned. The stone, their blood guiltiness is upon them. So if he had any sense of the law, which obviously he doesn't because of what he's practicing, both in the nature of it and the practicing of it. And so he's just, again, I think it's in name only, and maybe he'll claim any God that suits him.
And I think the text bears this out. One thing I was going to bring up, and we're going to have to move on, or we could talk about chapter 22 the entire time. So God comes to, he asks Yahweh, God comes to him in a dream, and, after the Moabites sin for him, and he says, hey, this is a situation, what do you want me to do? And God says, go. So on multiple occasions, he calls, Yahweh his God. But whenever the Lord hears to Balaam, on two instances, in 22:9 and 22:20, rather than the term Yahweh came to Balaam, it says God came to Balaam. And I think what Moses would have us understand is that while Balaam claimed Yahweh did not claim Balaam. And I think that's kind of set very subtly linguistically. But when you think about it, think of how many people today, and we were talking to the kids when we were studying for this, many people claim God. But what matters is not whether you claim God, what matters is if God claims you. It doesn't. You can say you know the Lord, okay, that's fine and good, and we all should. But what matters is if God knows you. And Paul says that in one of his letters where he says, you know God, or rather you are known by God. And so the emphasis on not whether you know God, it's whether God knows you. Okay, it's Matthew 7. Yeah, Lord. Yeah. So Balaam claims Yahweh. Yahweh doesn't claim Balaam. So I'll push us forward in this text, sir.
Yeah, so let's just quickly. It's interesting to me that in verse 8, he says to him, hey, spend the night and I'm going to check, right? And then in verse 9, God asks him what I think is a rhetorical question. Who are these men with you? Obviously, God knows the answer to that question, right?
Balaam didn't know.
It's a prompt to get Balaam to think, I think, which is what we see with the donkey's behavior as well. But so Balaam explains the situation, and God says, don't go. That should have been the marching order, right? But then
should have been all the correspondence they
verse
needed.
12, he says, you shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. There's no ambiguity. There's no wiggle room in that. But then in verse 15 through 17, you see Balak. What does Balak play on when he sends them back? Because that's not good enough, right? We don't take no for an answer. When he sends them back, what does he do to entice Balaam?
God said, I can't go.
Right.
He's like leaving the door open. I would come if it were up to me, but God said I can't go.
Well, yeah, first he sends him with a more honor. He appeals to his pride, right? Send more important people to ask him to come. And I'll do whatever you say to mean, name your price, buddy.
Yeah.
I'll pay it. And so again, he says, nope, can't do anything the Lord said, but y'all hang out tonight. And I'll see if maybe the Lord's changed his mind.
Doesn't that show us the nature of temptation? It's not one and done. You think temptation comes at you. Nope, it comes back again, stronger and stronger and stronger. And you've got to learn to repeatedly say no. Put your foot down. Hey, this is not the way.
You get a very clear glimpse that he wants to go, right?
Oh yeah.
Because otherwise, why ask him to spend the night? Why say I'll inquire?
Y'all can go ahead and get out of here.
And we don't know whether it's the pride, because that certainly was for Simon, or if it was greed, or it was both. But he clearly wanted to go, and God tells him, okay, go. Right? And I think you have a question.
Did I put a question up there?
Ta-
Yeah. All right.
ta-da.
So, advancing on to the second part of this chapter. So, God says, "Don't go." They come back. He says, "Let me ask God again." And God says, "Okay, go." So, why do you think that is? Balaam at Yahweh's word gets up and goes. So, why then is God angry after having given him permission to go? Thoughts?
Still did not want him to go, but God was permitting this to happen. Because he already told him, don't go.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're gonna go anyway, all right.
Yeah, and we're going to see what happens when he goes. So it's clearly not within the will of the Lord. So I see a couple of things. One, I see him being tested. You know, it's like, okay, I'll give you permission if it's really what you want, and so he's going to do it. Yeah, I mean, and that's really what I see ultimately happening. You want to go, go. So I think God's giving him up his desires and with it. And then you go read Romans chapter 1. But what do we see? God gave them up. God gave them up. God gave them up. Sometimes when God removes every hand and give us what we want, that's the worst thing that can happen for us spiritually. And I think it's not like God said go. He's going to give them into judgment. So they're traveling along, and just quickly on 3 occasions. So this God's placed the angel of the Lord. And so by the way, this is like one of the top dogs, one of the 2 spiritual beings in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord. Not an angel of the Lord, but the angel of the Lord. 3 times as they're traveling along. So the donkey sees the angel. Balaam has no idea. And on one occasion, he swerves off the road and the donkey. On another occasion, they're passing through this, they're passing the angel there, and the donkey sees the angel, and he passes by, and he squishes Balaam's leg against the rock, and Balaam beats it again. And then the 3rd time, they come to an even more narrow passage, no way for him to get by, and the donkey just lays down, and he starts wailing on a donkey. And this is where it starts to get weird.
Yeah, it gets
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, and number one, nothing in Scripture indicates Balaam's surprised that his donkey walks to him, right?
That's what
That
gets
in
me.
and of itself is weird enough to make a whole conversation about. Yeah, I mean, he's not surprised by this, but, and I'll just say this.
Yeah.
God tells him no, right? And he asks again. Well, actually, I think it goes back to God says, Balaam says, y'all spend the night, and I'll ask God. And God's first question is, who are these men that are staying with you? God knew the answer to that question, and so did Balaam, right? If he was a follower of Yahweh, so did he. But then, when he starts beating the donkey, and then God allows the donkey to speak, what's the donkey's argument to Balaam?
I've been a good donkey.
Yeah, I've been a good donkey. Have I? If you don't hear Eddie Murphy's voice, something's missing in your world. But he said, I've been a loyal donkey. Have I ever done that? Which I take to mean Balaam should have said, hey, something's going on here.
This donkey's talking to me.
Well, but before that, this donkey's not acting the way this donkey acts. And it should have been a reminder, which, as I was jotting down notes, I said, I wonder how many times in my life there's been an angel standing in my way. And I scoot up against the rock and slide by, or try to do everything. And I think back on my life, and I think there were times where there was providence that has absolutely brought me to good things. She's sitting right over there. And I think there are times that providence has kept me from really terrible consequences, despite the fact that I might have wanted to choose those consequences in that moment. Well, not the consequences, but the fun that came before it. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's really telling is there seems to be something here that God is trying to get Balaam's attention. And it's not working because Balaam's attention is firmly locked on the prestige and the honor and the money that he can get if he goes and curses Israel. And so much like you see in just about every case where mankind comes into contact with heavenly beings, he bows his head and he lays flat. He says in verse 34, I've sinned, for I did not know you stood in the way against me. Did he know? He didn't know the angel was there, but did he know he was running contrary to God's will? But in this moment, I've sinned. He repents. But then he says, now therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back.
There it is again.
I want to go, but if you tell me not to go, I won't go.
Well, he says,
You already told him not to go.
Yeah, there you go.
And then he goes again.
I think this is an intentional insult. Balaam is supposed to be this well-known diviner that had traveled hundreds of miles to to come have him make this decree. And as Zach already talked about, one of the most powerful spiritual beings is right in front of him. And the dumb donkey is the one that sees him, not him, this spiritualist guy, who's supposed to know all the things, be the authority among men, and yet the donkey is the one that sees him. Now, if God wanted Balaam dead, he would have been dead. If that angel would have wanted him dead, he would have been dead. I think this is more a sign for Balaam to go, oh, I'm not. The donkey knows more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, it's a good observation, good point there.
Well, and it does seem like at this point God decides, okay, I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to use you instead of for what Balak wants to do, instead of what you want to accomplish, because he doesn't come away with any glory or money either. Instead of that, I'm going to use you, a wicked person, to glorify the Lord, which is exactly what he does with Pharaoh, right?
He's not working for a purpose bigger than himself.
Right. Right.
So the point being, and I think you see the sovereignty of God here, you can't miss this, is God's got a plan for these people, and it's not going to be superseded by the wiliest or craftiest of men. And God's going to use us. That's the reality. God is going to use us. He's going to use our life. He will either use, we can either work with him and receive the blessings of being used by God, or we can work in opposition to him and we can suffer the consequences of that, but you're still going to be used by God. So take your pick, and I don't see why anyone would seek anything but other than to surrender themselves to God and receive the blessings that come from that. But kind of like Jonah, you can't outrun the Lord. He's going to use you how he wants to. And if it were me, I'd choose good. So, all right. So pushing on into chapter 23, he arrives and he meets with Balak. Balak says, "Well, it took so long. I promised you whatever you wanted, but now that you're here, let's go ahead and get things started." And that's really how chapter 23 begins. Balaam begins by saying, "Build 7 altars and prepare for me 7 bulls and 7 rams." Joel, did you have anything on that you wanted to say? Because you mentioned that just in comment.
And I don't know that I would want to argue it really hard and fast with anybody. It is telling, but God never tells him to build 7 altars with 7 bulls. But I did cross my mind that it makes me wonder if he is hedging his bets, if there's 7 altars to 7 different gods, Yahweh being one of them. Maybe not, but he certainly seems to be doing everything he can to curry
He seems
favor.
to be looking for the Lord, because in verse 3 he says, "Stand beside your burnt offering, I will go, perhaps Yahweh will come meet with me." And so I think these are probably to Yahweh, but more so the 7 is a representative of his devotion or seeking an answer rather than just a single one. But not only that, and you alluded to it in chapter 24 and verse 1, one of the and I don't know the technical name for it, one of the acts of divination, ancient divination, and I think even to this day is searching through the entrails of an animal to see what's to see some futuristic answer, and that probably was involved in the sacrifice. And the sands of the seashore. So he's looking out at the encampment of Israel, and he says, "Who can number a fourth of the part of Israel?" So just blessing them and the bounty which God has blessed them. Verse 10. Did y'all find verse 10 to be kind of an enigma? Verse 10, we're of chapter 23, where he says, "Let me die the death of the righteous." And that's what people want, isn't it? People want to die the death of the righteous. What have you got to do to die the death of the righteous? Yeah, you've got to live the life of the righteous than to die the death of the righteous. And I found this quote insightful. "Those who seek to separate living the life of the righteous and dying the death of the righteous hope to break an unbreakable chain. They would break God's chain sunder, happiness from holiness, salvation from sanctification, the end from the means. They would dance with the devil all day and sup with Christ at night, live all their lives long in Delilah's lap, and then go to Abraham's bosom when they die." And that's an expression of what Balaam wants. He wants to receive all of the spiritual blessings that God gives, but he doesn't want to live the life that God would have him live. And really, sadly, that's what Christianity is to so many people. As I've said before, it's nothing more than fire insurance. It's a get me out of hell free card. And that is going to be quite the disappointment for anyone who has had that sort of relationship with God on that day. So, Balaam's plea, "Let me die the death of the righteous," not wanting to live it, is nothing new, but that's what we see there. And so, obviously, Balak is dismayed by Balaam's blessing. Balaam again reminds him, he says, "I can only say what Yahweh has said." And so, that much he does have right. He can't go beyond what God has said, and he's got to speak the words that God has spoken. You want to talk a little bit about the second oracle, Joel?
Yeah, the second one, it's interesting that because this place didn't work, he says in verse 13, he says, let's try a different place. Maybe it's location. And we're going to go to a place where you don't see the entire congregation of Israel. Maybe that overwhelmed you. Maybe it overwhelmed God. I don't know. Let's try some place where we'll just see a portion of the people. We'll go to a different place. And so he moves Balaam to a different location, which immediately made me think about, there's a little bit of a guessing game, right? Like it's trying to figure out the riddle that's going to appease God. Luke, you mentioned Athens earlier with the altar to the unknown God. Well, just in case we missed one, we're going to have this one here. This seems to be, well, what is it that's going to make God happy? Is it, oh, it's not this mountain. Let's over here on this place. Let's go try that. Or, oh, it wasn't the whole congregation. It's just trying to figure it out. And I thought, when you step outside of, for Balaam, when you step outside of what God said, and God said, don't go, where do you land? Right? You land digging through the entrails of bulls, trying to figure out what's going to happen next. You try to figure out how to bribe this diviner or this soothsayer, really, and how to bribe God to work in your favor. And there's an obvious application, I think, for us. When we step outside of what we can consistently see in Scripture, we find ourselves, spiritual speaking, digging through the entrails of a bull sooner rather than later. So he moves to a different location, and Balaam again says, hey, I can only say what God tells me. It's interesting in verse 18 that this time God rebukes, well, God through Balaam rebukes Balak, right? Says, rise up, Balak, and hear, listen to me, son of Zippor. And then he basically goes into, God's not a man that he can lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? He reminds him that I'm not a man. I'm not able to be manipulated the way he probably is used to. He's a king, right? He's probably used to being able to get people to do what he wants them to do. And it's unlike the pagan gods that if you put the right things together to make me happy, I'll do what you want me to do. And then he goes into the rest of it. This is the place where I was talking about. It's interesting, verse 21. There's no iniquity in Jacob, right? Which I don't know about y'all, but the first time I read that and prepping for this, I thought, what on earth is going on there? But then you think about what God's done over the last 40 years, and it's true right now. It's true right now.
The thing that Balak brings on here, blessings from God and protection from God from the Israelites rather than they cursed them. You know, that's where Balak was going.
Or if we assume the absolute best about Balaam, guidance, right? And I don't think we should assume the absolute best, but even if we do, guidance, because if he had looked into what God's promises were, he would have known that they weren't in any danger. I know we're short on time now, but verse 25, Balak says, hey, neither curse them or bless them, just leave it alone. Just stop talking.
You've heard the
right?
old saying, if you can't say anything bad, don't say anything at all, right?
Right, but
Kind of backward.
well, and it made me think about neutrality, and I immediately thought about Laodicea, right? God's not happy with don't curse them or bless them. Just let it be.
Israel would have been, from Moab's perspective, better off if Balaam never would have come. And this is where you see God's sovereignty as he turns those curses into blessings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what God does for his people. There's this divine protection, and I don't mean literal divine protection in that nothing bad is going to happen to us, but more like the Genesis 50 verse 20 kind of divine protection. You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. God takes the tragedies and hardships of our life and God brings good from them. And that's just part of the blessing of being a child of God, is having the protection of the Lord.
Yep. And so verse 27, we see he's going to try one more place. So he takes him to Baal Peor, the top of a particularly holy place for Baal worship. So, and that, I think, takes us to the next section.
Is that the third or the fourth oracle? That's the
we
third,
are coming
right?
into the third.
Okay.
You got 3 minutes to do the third and
That's
fourth oracle.
It's nothing for me. So Balaam realizes what's going on at this point in time. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 24, it says he turned his face toward the wilderness. So Balak's word was, if you can't curse them, at least don't bless them. He knows what Yahweh wants to do, so he goes up there to this holy place of Baal, and he doesn't even look toward Israel because he knows if he does, God's going to have him bless him. And at this point in time, God's Spirit overrides Balaam's unwillingness to bless Israel. Verse 3, God's Spirit came upon him, making him do what he refused to do himself. And again, he blesses Israel. And he sees this vision of Israel's coming grandeur, it would seem, where Israel's going to be victorious in verse 8. Blessed are those who bless you, cursed are those who curse you. And after this, in verses, there's an interesting statement that Balak makes to him in verse 13, or verse 12. Balaam said to Balak, did I not tell you, messengers, if Balak should give me all of his house in silver and gold, I would not go beyond the word of the Lord. Actually, it's in verse 11, where Balak says to Balaam, essentially, get out of here. I will certainly honor you, but the Lord has held you back from honor. So, hey, I could have made you a rich man, but God's kept you from that. That's what temptation says to us. It says, I could have satisfied you, I could have given you pleasure, but God's keeping you back from that. And that's how so many people who fail to understand God and his nature and his commandments for us, in protecting us and keeping us from sin. That's what it whispers to the world, is God is keeping you back from pleasure. God's keeping you back from honor. And so the Spirit of the Lord overrides Balaam's unwillingness to bless them, and he does so again. And then as they're departing, he takes up and offers one final discourse. He says, let me tell you what's going to happen in latter times. And in his final oracle in chapter 24, numerous things are mentioned. Essentially, there's this idea of he sees Israel victorious, he sees Israel blessed, he sees Israel defeating their enemies. And he rattles off numerous ones. Edom shall be dispossessed, Amalek's end is utter destruction, the Kenites will be destroyed, the Moabites will be destroyed. And this is obviously a foretelling of future events that's probably most immediately physically fulfilled in David, because he talks about this idea of a star coming up, the scepter coming forth. So that has the ring to it of Genesis chapter 49, where the scepter will come out of Judah. And so that's ultimately, or first going to be fulfilled in David, but more significantly spiritually pointing to, I believe, the son of David, that is Jesus. And Jesus is going to come and vanquish his enemies. I'm not talking about nations. David's going to kind of conquer the surrounding nations, but Jesus is going to come and defeat his enemies and dispossess them. And then the chapter concludes by Balaam and Balak going their separate ways. But if you think that's how the story ends, sadly, it's not. And we'll be talking about that Wednesday night, Lord willing. So, all right. Anybody have any follow-up comments or questions? Guess we got a minute or two, but made it. Thank you.
He made it first time. He made it for the other. He was something one way or the other.